So when at the Dubuque Mises Institute, where I'm a senior fellow, we were putting out a new edition of Mises' book. So we wanted to get rid of the copies we had of the old edition. So we put a little notice up on the website. We got like 90 copies left of the old edition. We give it away for $15. And you would think we were giving away catalogs. People are like climbing over their grandmothers to get hold of copies. They actually shut the site down. People trying to think. These are all like 18 to 25 people who are trying to get hold of this. Miraculous. Young whippersnappers want to read a 900-page book on the economy? Yes, because this guy understands what's going on. Plus, he writes in a way that a human being can understand. He deliberately, in all 900 pages, he did not include one graph or chart. Not one. It's all just words. Because he's saying that economics is just about explaining the world. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain it. So he kept on, kept on. Now, he was shunned, again, because he was so uncomfortable. He wouldn't say, well, the free market is good, but, 17 caveats have to be observed. No. I'm a free market man, and you better take it or leave it. Well, the academic community left it, by and large. And yet, he died in 1973. One of his colleagues, F.A. Hayek, won the Nobel Prize the next year, basically for elaborating on Mises' own theory. And 30 to 40 years later, Mises is still being talked about more than he was in his own lifetime, because everything he said is being vindicated right before our eyes. And all these nobody professors who shunned him and laughed at him at the time, nobody remembers their names. Who was teaching at NYU in 1957? Who knows? Mises was teaching there in an unpaid position. They were willing to give him an unpaid position. We'll let this Neanderthal, these little seminars, and yet he got the last laugh. Toward the end of his life, he wrote up his notes and recollections, and he said, he was wondering about, does he have any regrets? And you might think maybe his regrets were, I was too uncompromising, maybe I should have tried to be a little bit more diplomatic. His only regret is, I wasn't tough enough. So this is the kind of guy you would think people would be interested in. And yeah, they are getting interested in it, but unfortunately, I don't hear his name mentioned on the major right-wing radio shows. I don't see him on the major websites. He's like, he's gone, but why? Why would he be gone? The guy's heroic in every way. There was a Batman comic that came out that featured Mises in it, because the story of his heroic escape from Europe is, kind of exciting. We're not usually that interested in the fate of economists, but it turns out it's very exciting what happened to this particular economist. So the point is that this guy theorizes about what happens when you have, for example, a Federal Reserve System that decides that the way to create prosperity is to force interest rates lower than the free market wants them to be. And he said, well, you're going to have what looks like prosperity when that happens. But eventually, the economy is going to catch up with us. And I give all the details about this. You can go to my learnaustrianeconomics.com and learn exactly the nuts and bolts of the very simple stuff of what Mises meant by this. He's arguing that the free market is going to have its revenge. If you start tinkering around with prices, you're going to get shortages or surpluses. If you start tinkering around with interest rates, you're going to get boom and bust. And that is exactly what happened in the 1920s. The head of the New York Fed in 1927 said to another couple of central bankers, we are going to give a coup de whiskey to the stock market. And they did. How'd that turn out? Well, same thing. The years leading up to the housing bubble. Oh, we had super low interest rates. What could be bad about that? Well, we're living through what could be bad about that. And Mises explained why it happens, too. So that's why this congressman and this TV commentator figured it out, because they read Mises. So not everybody wants to read 900 pages, so that's why I write short books. And I can tell you, if you really want to know, go read 900 pages. And some people do. That's incredible that I'm living in an age where people do that. So that's what the elephant in the living room is. That's my second point. We can't talk about the economy and leave the Federal Reserve out of it because it's too complicated, or because you're probably some kind of crank when you talk about the Federal Reserve. That's what we've been told for a long time. For nearly 100 years, the Fed was kept out of political discussion. There's no candidate to talk about the Fed. Well, what are you, some kind of a crank? The Fed is there for our own good. Our wise experts are in charge of the Fed, citizens. What's the matter with you? They're there to coordinate the economy. They're there to minimize the inflation of prices and to maximize jobs and output. That's why they're there, and to create stability for us. stability. That's the word I've used for the past 10 years, right? Stability. So we got to talk about this. What's the Fed supposed to do? It's supposed to do those things. Has it done those things? It has not. And when you look at the actual numbers, the Fed has not given us fewer recessions. It has not given us shallower recessions. It has not given us more stability. The Great Depression was worse than anything we had before the creation of the Fed. And then I talk about those pre-Fed. What about before the Fed? Can't blame the Fed for the panic of 1873. That's true. So I have tomwoods.com/panics where I talk about that. But the point is, it's an interference with the free market. This was not capitalism. This was an interference with the free market. What the Fed has given us is, not only has it given us boom and bust for reasons that Mises explained, it's also given us moral hazard. And this is the reason that when you rent a car, you don't take it for an oil change, right? No one in this room has ever taken a rental car for an oil change, right? You never take a rental car to the car wash. You don't, and probably you drive it slightly more recklessly than you drive your own car. Why is that? Because you are not going to be bearing the costs. You bear a little bit of the cost, that maybe the car will run a little bit worse while you have it, but some other suckers that are bearing the cost. That's called moral hazard. When property rights are not well defined. Well, I don't have a property right in that car, so I'm going to drive it into the ground. Now, just in case any of you happen to need to lend me your car at some point, I don't actually do this. I don't care to drive it. But the point is that we all act this way. Well, likewise, how is the presence of the Federal Reserve, which is not constrained by resources? It's not like the Fed has to go mine gold to create money. It's not constrained by resources. You create all the money at once. How does that influence you as a major player on Wall Street? Well, you're going to be more reckless than you would otherwise be, because you know there is no constraint on the extent to which this institution can bail you out. So moral hazard. And then also, what's it done to the dollar? The dollar has lost more than 95% of its value since the Fed was created. And you may say, well, that happens all the time. The dollar always loses value. That's not the Fed's fault. But it is the Fed's fault, because before we had the Fed, the dollar kept gaining value. Could you imagine living in a world where your dollar became more valuable? You just sit there, and it gets more valuable. That was the world that all Americans lived in for the first 150 years of the Republic. They all lived in that world. And we're supposed to believe this isn't so bad, don't worry about it, because it lost the 95% over a long period of time. That's what we told them. But what does that actually mean for the average person? For the average person, it means if you want to retire, you don't just pile up a stack of dollar bills, because by the time you retire, they'll lose 1 or 2/3 of their value. So what do you have to do? You've got to go to the stock market, you've got to buy mutual funds, or you've got to buy bonds, whatever. Most people have no business doing these things. And then you have to worry about boom and bust. So everybody now has to be a speculator just to hold steady, thanks to the Fed. This is not a record that we need to be boasting about, or we should be ashamed of criticizing. Alan Greenspan was the Fed chairman who did more to create this housing bubble than everybody else put together. And it was Greenspan's policy for years to pursue what's become known as the wealth effect. The wealth effect was this. If the Fed can gin up the stock market and raise stock prices, it will make investors feel wealthy. They look at their stock portfolios and say, wow, look, the value is going way up, and that will make them feel richer, and that will therefore make them want to go out and buy and borrow more because they feel richer. Now, that's not really a free market. And there's no way we can support that. That is central planning from start to finish. And yet, how many well-known conservatives were talking about this in the 80s and 90s? I mean, what, zero? Nobody. No, to the contrary, Greenspan is this wonderful free market guy, and now we have to suffer the consequences. Now the left is saying, oh, well, you had your free market guy in charge, look what happened. This is not free market. Repeatedly, in fact, the bailout mentality is inherent in this wealth effect, because if the whole economy depends on rich people feeling wealthy because their stock prices are going up, if anything threatens to bring stock prices down, it must be stopped. And so, therefore, the bailouts happen. If anything's going on in the economy that might cause some stock prices to take a haircut, we can't have that. Bailout, bailout, bailout. We've got to preserve this wealth effect. And how much does that wealth effect help the average person? From 2000 to 2007, the major years of the housing bubble, the net number of breadwinner jobs created was 0. That's what the Fed has to show for all this phony baloney, fake prosperity stuff it's been giving us. Nothing to show for itself. Now, when Greenspan was asked about his policies in Congress, he would just give some incoherent mumbo-jumbo as an answer. Now, you think I'm making that up, I'm not being fair to him. He admitted this on TV. I can't remember if it was Diane Sawyer or somebody from 60 Minutes asked him about this. She played him a clip and said, now what on earth did you just say to me? And he admitted that it was nonsense. He used the phrase syntax destruction. So this is a guy who thinks that by adjusting interest rates and money supply, he could bestow prosperity on us all. He also thinks that he has the right to call this guy, that he can just sit there and when representatives talk to him, he has every right to sit there and snow them and just make stuff up that doesn't even make sense. And of course, most of our congressmen are not exactly PhDs. And so he's just sitting there saying stuff that we now know is meaningless, and they're all going, yeah, this guy, he knows what's up. There was an article in the New Republic in the early 1990s, written by Stephen Glass. Some of you may know Stephen Glass was the guy who just invented all the stories, and then the New Republic figured out that that's why he's getting all the good scoops. He's just making this stuff up. There was a whole movie about this called Shattered Glass, and Stephen Glass wrote an article about Greenspan. And in his article, he said that on Wall Street, some Wall Street investors had put together a shrine to Greenspan, his picture and flowers and incense, and they all go to meditate in front of him. Now, he made that up, but no one noticed that it was a made-up story. This guy knows how to run the economy. Maybe we should wave a little incense. When polytheism never hurt anybody, he seems to be how was that allowed to go on? So, in other words, this is central to understanding what's happening in the economy, and yet zip, nothing. We hear nothing about it. Finally, if we're going to support the free market, we have to support it 100% of it. All the way. No exceptions. Oh, I don't know. No exceptions, right? And yet here, talk about an exception. When TARP was proposed and the bailouts were proposed, well, all of a sudden, all the free marketeers were nowhere to be found. And I don't even need to name the names. We all know who they were. On the left, we had Rachel Maddow actually saying, I'm not kidding, she actually said that if we hadn't had the bailouts, we wouldn't even have an economy. What does that mean? We wouldn't have exchanged things? Nobody would buy eggs anymore because they would be like others. Nothing. But then the conservatives, so-called, a lot of them were lecturing the free market purists. Can't be a purist, we gotta have these bailouts. Okay, because what? Because what? Why do we need them? Because without the bailouts, ATMs are going to go dark, and payroll won't be met, and we're all going to descend into a terrible black hole of death. I mean, we were told all these phony baloney stories. If we don't bail out AIG right now, your bank is going under. Well, this was all a lie. This wasn't just a matter of, well, maybe in these cases we have to intervene. It is absolutely to the eternal shame of supporters of this policy that they are on record supporting it. The AIG matter was completely confined to Wall Street, and it would have fizzled out right there. Same thing with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and Citigroup. AIG, 90% of it was solved. Its regular insurance products currently solved. The problem with AIG were these liabilities involving so-called credit default swaps. But you deal with this in bankruptcy. In fact, the AIG CEO later said, maybe we should have just had AIG go through bankruptcy. Yeah, well, we were all called Neanderthals. Oh, we're just trying to protect Main Street and the Main Street banks. And they hope that we're too stupid to see through that. The Main Street banks were not exposed to the busted CDSs of AIG. It was about a dozen institutions around the world that had this exposure. These dozen institutions, you put them together, they've got $20 trillion worth of assets, and they're facing $60 billion in losses. So in other words, if they hold off on executive bonuses for a few months, they can absorb this whole loss. But we're told, no, everybody drop everything. McCain and Obama have to go back to Washington to put this through. And meanwhile, the calls are coming in, 2,000 to 1 against, and they still go ahead and do it. And the commercial banks held a trivial amount of these private label all just a whole lot of nonsense. And then finally, I'll just give one final example. We had the case of, the case of short selling. There was a ban on short selling. Short selling is a way for the average investor to communicate to the rest of the world, this firm is going down. Well, this was really hurting some of these investment institutions. They didn't want their stocks sold short. So they were in a position to just get on the phone and say, hey, you better put to Washington, you better put a stop on short selling. And that's what Washington immediately did. Well, for the next 15 days, nobody can sell any financial stock. Like, what? Is that the free market? I mean, why should we want to keep in power the same people in these institutions who cause all these problems? That's what the free market is. We weed them out. And right now, I want to urge you to check out the book by David Stockman, The Whole Adoption Case. It's called The Great Deformation. David Stockman, in just the first 3 chapters of this book, demolishes all these claims about why we need the bailouts and we need to make an exception. It was phony. It was just to save the rear ends of certain individuals and certain institutions that we would have been well rid of. It was not going to keep us all afloat or keep the economy going, or we wouldn't have been buying eggs anymore if we hadn't had these bailouts. It is absolute nonsense and despicable. And those people, so-called conservatives who lecture us for being free market purists, owe us an apology. However, Washington, D.C. is not known for giving people apologies. However, I suppose at the ballot box, there's one way that we could think about trying to force them to apologize, but I would much rather than waste my time worrying about these people. Spread knowledge so that we will not be scammed again, and we will not allow this kind of conventional wisdom to spread again about how the free market has failed us. The free market did not fail us. The Federal Reserve and the federal government failed us. And so, therefore, we don't need them to have additional power. We don't need them to shovel money to influential people. To the contrary, those influential people need to be cut down to size. They can trade in their Ferraris for a Hyundai Sonata and be perfectly happy doing less damage to the rest of us. That is the message Americans need to hear. Not just that we need lower taxes, but that we've got to keep our eye on that elephant in the living room and prevent any further stampedes from wrecking our prosperity. Okay, that is it. I'm out of time for this first one. Thanks.
Don't worry, we'll be back. I promise. Are you having fun? Yeah, this is great. I mean, did you imagine if you come to a Republican Party event and enjoy yourself like this? This is great, right? This is something I'm really proud of. I'm proud to be bringing this message on behalf of this party out around the state, getting out of the point with all these events and getting around the state. We hope to do this same event at some other venues across the state. If we're able to get the funding to do that, that's something we're excited about, something dedicated about. I want you to know that if you're enthused about the message you're hearing today, you have a home in the Republican Party of Iowa. And I want you to think about that and be proud that we've got a party that is promoting this kind of message, this kind of intellectual clarity on the troubles of the day. I'm proud that we were able to do this event and secure sponsors that allow us to do this for free. Because if we don't get new people into this party and young people into this party and present a message like this that we're enthused about, this party's going to cease to be relevant. So I'm really proud of how things are going today. I hope you're having a great time. I certainly am. I know there was built into the schedule a couple of short breaks. I think rather, if you need a break, just excuse yourself, slide out the back door. I think it would take us longer than 5 minutes to get everybody out of here and then get them back in. So let's just try to keep moving with the program if that's all right. If you need to take a break, go ahead and slide out and then slide back in a few minutes. But in the interest of time, I kind of want to keep things rolling. About 5 years ago, I was traveling for work, and I was in Iowa City. And I had some time to kill. I was downtown, so I stopped in the University bookstore. I happened to be there. I tried to be a scholarly kind of guy, and I was curious about what was being taught there at the University of Iowa. And while I was in engineering school, I took a lot of econ classes. It was something that interested me. And I wandered over to the econ section there in the bookstore to check And I pinched myself. I'm like, this can't be. I'm imagining this. This is some kind of dream. And I looked around and looked at all kinds of books there. Books with essays, either by or about people like Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, Carl Menger, De Soto, Say, Henry Hazlitt. Economics in One Lesson is for sale at the University Bookstore at the University of Iowa, and a host of others. And so here I am, I'm in town on business. I'm standing in line with all these co-eds, and I'm hauling about 20 pounds of books out of there for my own library. And I couldn't believe this. Austrian economics is being taught. This was 5 years ago, too, on a campus here in Iowa, and it gave me hope. It gave me some hope for the future that some young people were getting a message of economic truth to explain what's going on in the world around them. And it excited me. And I'm excited today because we have that professor of Austrian economics who was teaching that course at the University of Iowa with us today. And he spent decades in the graduate school of banking at the University of Wisconsin. And he's going to give us some instruction today, Mr. Patrick Barron. I'm in the enviable position of following some poets. I will tell you that I am old enough to remember Penny Candy by God. I just brought you out that he did too. And I love the part with the little dots around the paper. You put little dots and then you choose the paper and use it for spitballs in school. That was a horrible disciplinary thing when I was in school. That's about as bad as it got. Well, they asked me today to talk about the Euro debt crisis. I've sort of taken this as just a personal interest of mine. I spent a lot of time in Europe over the years. I have many friends over in Europe. I've given some talks over there. And frankly, if you're not following this thing, I think you're going to start going on the web every day and just Google Euro debt crisis and 1,000 articles. It's very, very interesting what's happening in Europe. It's much more interesting than actually following what's going on in the United States, simply because here we're ruled by the Almighty Fed. What the heck are we going to do? There's nothing we can do about it. Europe is in worse shape than we are. That's really saying something. However, Europe has the ability to get out of it. And I think we can get out of it easier than we can. And that's going to be after the break, which includes some kind of a lottery, which I understand is going to be a lottery between the crops. I'll tell you how Europe can get out of this problem. Well, first of all, what is the European Union? A lot of people don't know what it is, why it's there. Well, it really, the impetus of the European Union came right after World War II. And France and Germany had fought 2 wars in 75 years, or 3 wars in 75 years. Everybody remembers World War I and II, of course. They forget about the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Well, in 1870, the Germans took Alsace-Lorraine, which is along the Franco-German border. The Germans took that away from the French. In World War I, the French took it back. In World War II, the Germans took it back from the French initially, and then they got kicked out. And the other things that now France technically knows Alsace-Lorraine, although we've never been there. It's really a very interesting area, so half German, half French. But the big problem that faced everyone was that we've had 3 wars between Germany and France that have dragged the rest of the world into this thing. How are we going to stop this in the future? And they decided properly, that one of the big problems is the breakdown of the world trade. That countries all try to become autarkic. And this is just a word that you've heard the term autism. That refers to first people that sort of have an inner life and they can't communicate very well. Well, countries that try to become self-sufficient are termed to try to become autarkic nations. And this is what happened before World War II. All the nations of the world went through this crazy thing where everybody wanted to shut down trade and become autarkic. They wanted to
Germany especially, and it had a history and a reason for this. After World War I, Germany went through a very terrible time during the Versailles Peace Treaty. After World War I, the British and the Americans maintained a blockade on imports to Germany. 100,000 people starved in Germany. So there are reasons that all these things happen that you don't hear about in the history books. But Germany especially decided that it was going to become a autarkic country. Well, what happens, Frederick Bastiat explained to us back in the middle of the 19th century that when goods do not cross borders, armies will. And so Germany realized, well, it needed oil from the Caucasus, and it needed goods from the plains of Russia, so they invaded those countries and tried to conquer them. Touched off World War II. So the big push was, we've got to liberalize trade with Europe. And that's what they started working toward. And I can tell you today that in Europe, they have essentially achieved that goal. They have achieved the goal of pretty much having free trade in Europe. It's a great accomplishment. It's where they really should stop. But they didn't want to stop. From the very beginning, from the very first beginnings of what we now call the European Union, which was called the European Coal and Steel Union, from the very beginning, there were statesmen in Europe who said, well, we've got to go beyond this. We must have a United States of Europe. They looked to us as the great example. They said, America is powerful because we have this big country, we have a big economy, we have a unified federal government. Look what the United States just did in World War II. We fought wars on two fronts and we conquered everybody. That's what Europe means. We need to have a United States of Europe. We need a federal Europe. So right away, there were people saying we want to go beyond just having free trade in Europe, the free mobility of people across borders, being able to invest their money. We need a federal government for all of Europe. Well, this didn't get very far in the 1950s and 60s because there was one man who stood in the way of that. It was a man who pretty much dominated European politics as long as he lived, and that was Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle sort of vilified, I think, unfairly in the United States. Read about Charles de Gaulle and what he wanted. He was a great statesman. He was the dominant statesman of the world post-World War II. And as long as de Gaulle was alive, even when he was out of power, which he was for about 12 years in World War II, as long as de Gaulle was alive, there was no hope of having a federal Europe because de Gaulle was a French nationalist. And he said, France will be very pleased to meet with our friends, to form councils. We will send our representatives to represent us, and we will come up with ways in which we can all cooperate, reduce trade barriers, make things better for all of us Europeans. But he scoffed at the idea that any supranational national organization would lecture Europe, would lecture France on what to do, or instruct France on what it could not do. Well, when de Gaulle passed away, then the European Federalists started coming to the forefront. De Gaulle had arranged for his successors to take over as president of France pretty much after him. While they were in power, that was all dampened down. But when they finally were pushed out, then the European Euro Federalists came along. So what you have to understand, what's going on with Europe right now is, with the Euro, is that this is a result of the Euro Federalist project. The Euro as a common currency is a tool of the Euro Federalist project. And this is why the Euro Federalists are going to fight tooth and nail to keep the Euro no matter how bad things get over there. No matter what the evidence is that the Euro is a failure, and it is failing, and it will fail. And I'll explain the economic science on why it will fail. But they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep this, because without a common currency, without their ability to control the common currency, there's really no hope for a federal Euro. So that's why they're fighting for it. Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, Francois Hollande, they all see themselves as presidents of Europe on par with the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Great Britain. That's how So why is the euro going to fail? Well, the euro is going to fail because of two powerful, unstoppable economic forces. Tom Woods referred to one called the moral hazard. And moral hazard explains the euro. When the euro was introduced as a common currency, of course, the countries of Europe, not all of them, only 17 of the 27 members of the European Union got joined the euro prior. But those countries all turned in their currencies for euros at a certain exchange rate. Immediately, they started explicitly announcing that this meant that any country joining the Eurozone would be able to sell its debt at lower prices, and that the European Union would not allow any country that was in the European monetary union, as they call it, that's the 17 of the 27 countries that use the euro, would not allow any of them to default on their debt. Well, this is manna from heaven for some of these countries that were already heavily in debt. Now all of a sudden their borrowing rates dropped to German levels. Germany is the one country in Europe that is the most responsible. And so now, instead of having their debt drop to lower levels and saying, well, the lower debt level, we can have less of a burden on our people. Oh, heck no. Expand the welfare state. Let's start off the housing level in Spain. Everything, the debt started exploding after that. So that's the first economic force that started, is this moral hazard, and it's working today. And it will continue to work until the euro is gone. The second force is an economic force called the tragedy of the commons. And tragedy of the commons means that whenever there's a resource that is held in common, unless it is protected with strong property rights, which a common resource is not, it will be plundered to extinction. For example, if there's a cookie jar up here and it's filled with money, and we say, you know what, there's a cookie jar here and there's money in it. A bunch of dollars kind of pouring out the top. It belongs to all of us. We all have a legitimate right to come up and grab some. What's going to happen? I wouldn't want to stand in front of a cookie jar. There's big guys out here in the front and they die for it. Well, this is what is happening in Europe, is the Euro project has placed all economic forces upside down. If the worse your budget deficit is, then the more euros you get in very kind of backhanded ways that were promised that this would never happen. One of the ways is, well, the major way that these countries are being bailed out is through the European Central Bank. What a lot of people don't realize is that this is the system over there is called the European system of central banks. All countries of Europe still have their central banks. There is still a Bundesbank in Germany. There is still a Bank of France. Also, there is still a central bank in Greece. So what these central banks are doing is they're buying the worthless debt of their governments. Well, the Maastricht Treaty specifically says that the European Central Bank is not allowed, absolutely not allowed to buy debt from sovereign nations. It cannot buy the debt of Greece or France or Germany or anybody. But they interpret that, well, the European Central, no one said anything about the European Central Bank lending euros. That's not buying euros. That's not buying debt. So what they're doing is they are lending euros to Greece, and they're taking as collateral the worthless debt of these countries' governments. For example, back in December, there was a big thing in the paper about Greece. Did Greece qualify for the next $10 billion tranche of the money that they had been promised by the European Financial Stability Fund? Well, this is a fund that is actually, the countries actually donated money to. So they had to meet all kinds of requirements. Were they going, did they or did they not meet all the requirements so they could get this next $10 billion? Of course, they always qualify, they always get the money. But what wasn't really noticed was during that same period of time, during in the month of December alone, The European Central Bank gave Greece $19 billion through this bilateral bill for giving them euros in exchange for taking debt that Greece has collateral. So it's the European Central Bank that is really exploding the money supply over there, and they're the ones that are fueling this great debt crisis in Europe, and nothing is going to stop it. Nothing will. When we come back from we're going to have here a little break, I will tell you what the solution is. But in the meantime, I'll give you a little bit of a preview. There was one country in Europe that has not gone along with this. It's gone along with very reluctantly. That country was reunified in the 1990s, and that country is the answer to the Euro debt crisis. So if you come back, I'll tell you what it's all about. Thank you.
with us today. That's the governing board of the Republican Party of Iowa. I know a bunch of those are here. Is Marcus Fendler here? Yeah. Stand up, please. Marcus is from Washington County, and I'll go through these. I know Tony Krebsbach is here. Tony, Floyd County, Mitchell, sorry about that. John Kavitsky is here. Dave Cushman, I thought I saw. Joel Fernandez came up from Polk County. And Jeff Shipley from Jefferson County. Let's see, Steve Griffith, would you wave your hand, our executive director of our party? And our organization director, John Furlan. These are the staff that helped put this event together. John's probably, there he is, very quickly, before Professor Barron's comes back in, there was a free raffle at the door. We're giving away 3 prizes. The first 2 are books from Professor Woods. And the first ticket is 6419008. Wins a book. Our next winner is 6418980. Wins a book as well. We got one of them here. Who got the other? Let me read it again. The first one was 6419008. Are we in the room? We got that one? All right, and you were 8980? Okay, congratulations. And one more. The next prize is a $50 value. It's a ticket to go to the reception out at the Park Farm Winery with Nathan Cushman's afterwards to meet with Tom Woods and other folks. You're all certainly welcome to come to this event. And in fact, I encourage you to come out. That is $50. We're proud to do this event for free, but we also want to have a way for other people to show their commitment and help out with sponsoring an event like this and have that event with that dinner and wine and the reception. That's $50. It's on the back of the program that you saw coming in the door. We'll tell you how to get there. We'd love to have you come out. I know a lot of you have already bought tickets and we're planning to see you there, and that's going to be a good time. But I'm going to give away a ticket right now to number 6418991. At this time, let's get Professor Barron back up here to continue our lesson in So, the Soviet Union imploded in 1989, 1990, the Berlin Wall collapsed.
And when the Soviet Union imploded, that became the last real serious barrier to the reunification of Germany. Americans and the English and the French, to a certain extent, were not really too worried about Germany reuniting and becoming a threat to Europe again. That does seem to be the past even today. It's again, a great achievement of Western statesmanship that war in Europe is today, for all practical purposes, not thinking. So in the Soviet Union, they were never going to watch so they imploded, never moved the last barrier, Germany joined, and France, apparently according to a World War II treaty, the Allies individually had veto powers on whether Germany could unite. And France had one stipulation before they ever got approval, and that was that the Germans would give up the Deutschland. And so they did. And there were powerful politicians in Germany that were in favor of it because they thought that Germany was controlled Europe. And that it would just be the Bundesbank, which is the central bank of Germany, would actually run things, and that would just be fine. Well, it hasn't really worked out that way. The euro came into existence around 2000, give or take a year or two. And what the Germans failed to realize was that on the board of the European Central Bank, there are 17 countries, and each one has a vote. Germany has one vote. Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world, behind the United States, China, and Japan. And yet it has one vote. It does not control its mind. This is just a powerful situation. And within a few years, the German members of European board members of the European Central Bank started resigning because they would be outvoted by Luxembourg, for example. So, in fact, one of the latest votes at which the European Central Bank Board voted to institute really what has become an open-ended policy of lending euros to all these bankrupt countries through their central banks. The vote was 16 to 1. Guess who the one was? Germany. So it goes even deeper than this. Germany has pretty much a balanced budget. Germany doesn't need euros. Germany is running their country in a very financially responsible way. Germany has always been a very responsible country financially. The Deutschmark appreciated from the time it was instituted at the end, shortly after the end of World War II, the Deutschmark appreciated just steadily as the dollar because the dollar was steadily inflated at a much greater rate than the Deutschmark. The Deutschmark wasn't really completely stable, but it was undoubtedly the least inflationary currency in the Western world until it was replaced, until the Germans gave it up. But so what is happening is that Germany is the one that is actually paying for all of this. And why they are allowing themselves to have this happen to the German people are not happy about it. There are growing the voices within the Bundestag, which is the German legislature, that they should get out of the Eurozone. Germany wants to be a good European partner. I think there is still some, I think, misguided and unnecessary World War II guilt out there that Germany really deserves whatever it gets. It's still out of pay. In fact, the Greeks, I understand, are now passing legislation. They're trying to present Germany with hundreds of billions of euros worth of bills for what they did in Greece during World War II, which was not necessary. Guys, World War II is over. God. But what's happening through the European Central Bank is they're not settling. The European Central Bank is not settling their accounts. They have a system called the Start 2. I don't know what Start stands for, and I don't know why it's called number 2. But this is it's called the Start 2 quote system. Well, the Start 2 system just means that if a Greek citizen decides that he's not so sure that his local bank is going to survive, he walks down the street to the Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank has an office in Athens. He opens up an account and transfers all his money over to the Deutsche Bank. Well, through the mechanism of the European Central Bank and through the Start 2 system, the Greek Central Bank is given a debit. Is charged for that amount, and the Bundesbank, the German Central Bank, is given a credit. But these are never paid. In other words, the Greeks never actually transferred the real assets to the German bank. So steadily, ever since the euro was initiated, I just went on the web this morning to the website for the Bundesbank and did the history of what has been happening. So very steadily, the credits have been building up at the European Central Bank for Germany, and now we're up to almost 600 billion euros. Well, 600 billion euros is the equivalent of about 750 billion dollars. Now let me try to put that in. But these numbers can get so big that sometimes they go, what the heck does that mean? Well, it means that Germany has not been paid for the equivalent of about double its monetary base. The United States, monetary base in the United States, or M1 in the United States, which is checking accounts and cash, which is considered to be pretty much what money is in the United States. You probably make it is at $2.4 trillion. Okay, so this is $750 billion. So roughly a third of our economy. Well, Germany's economy is a little less than 1/4 the size of the United States. So Germany is sitting out here with essentially the equivalent of the entire, what would be for us, the entire American money supply. Just owned by the rest of the world. I wonder if they're ever going to get paid. Well, yeah, they'll probably be glad to get Greek bonds. Those are great. Maybe Cypriot bonds, or the latest one is Portuguese bonds. You know, that's the latest one the country that's going at. So this is why I am recommending a political friend of mine in Europe. We're going to give a talk in no less than 3 weeks over at the European Parliament in Brussels. We're recommending that Germany get the heck out of the European monetary reinstate the Deutsche Mark. That would be a great benefit, and if they should go one step further at collaboration and control. Only one country in the world has more, only one government in the world owns more gold than Germany, and that's the United States. We own 3,100 and some tons of gold. Germany, or 8,000 tons of gold. Germany owns 3,000 tons of gold. Remember, Germany's economy is about 1/4 their size. So on a per GDP basis, their gold holdings are actually greater than ours. So they have plenty of gold at which to back immigration. And that's what they should do. Now, first of all, this would be a non-coercive backing by Germany. They're not going to be harming anybody. They're just taking back their currency. They're just getting out of an organization that is harming them. So it's non-coercive. They're going to have a lot of screens from Europe. They're going to have a lot of screens from all over the world. They are a sovereign nation, and they can do whatever they wish. But this would have to be even better because over the long term, this would mean that the United States would have to solve for its money supply. Otherwise, the Deutsche Mark will become the next reserve currency. It might take 10 years, it might take 20 years. But Germany is a great trading nation. It's a great exporting nation. And a new, especially a new gold-backed Deutschmark, would be the currency of choice by international companies for international trade. The demand for the Deutschmark would rise. That means the demand for the dollar, the pound sterling, the yen, the yuan would all fall. That means that our exchange rate with Germany would start to fall. That means that dollars would start to flow back into the United States. This would cause tremendous inflation in the United States. The only way we could stop this would be to do the same thing that Germany did at the time of the dollar. So this is the solution that I see it to actually to the whole world global crisis, monetary crisis. And I think that it's very interesting that in my lifetime, in my lifetime, I was born just after getting edge of baby boomers. In my lifetime, I was born just after World War II. Germany has always been this country that there were a bunch of Nazis. And it's really hard to even turn on the TV today without seeing some sort of old movie or even current movie that it's all a bunch of bad Germans and they're all terrible people. I think it would be wonderful if 50 years from now, the world looks back and says Germany saved the world. And I think it can.
Do you not feel smart as being in the same room as each other?